I know what it's like. My dad is locked up in his nursing home and can receive no visitors. My mum is in hospital and she too can have no visitors. Today I'm saying Mass in an empty cathedral. And I miss my people very much. I've had to postpone ordinations and confirmations and more. And priests and others I've long awaited from overseas are shut out from our country indefinitely. So I know what it's like for people. The spike in cases of COVID-19 Delta and subsequent restrictions have separated us once more from relatives, friends, parishioners, school and work colleagues, and we feel it very keenly. We all sympathise with our public officials in their balancing act to keep us safe. But because human beings are social animals, hardwired for company, separation affects us deeply. Protecting us from disease or unemployment is important, but it's not enough. We have to remember what health and economy are for. To experience relationships, truth, beauty, goodness, leisure, worship, and more. And lockdown impedes them all. Even if it's necessary, isolation comes at a real human cost. Christians are not unfamiliar with all this. In today's Gospel, Jesus and the apostles seek some solitude. But in our epistle, Paul has isolation thrust upon him. For he is writing from prison. And from his cell he reminds the Ephesians that they too had experienced alienation from God, Israel, each other. Lacking the anchors of faith and community, they'd been tossed to and fro by fads, fake news, and scams. They'd lied and stole, wrangled and slandered one another. If ever people were socially distanced or self-isolated, it was in their pre-Christian days. As if writing to locked-down Sydney today, Paul demonstrates that every human being feels caged in some sense. We all experience alienation, separation, or loneliness at some time. We all know the consequent powerlessness and depression. Yet something changed for Paul and his disciples. Today we hear that you that used to be so far from us and from each other have been brought very close. The old hostilities and barriers have been broken down. Christ has united us. So then, Paul continues, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but citizens with the saints and members of God's household. Jesus Christ is the antidote to spiritual isolation and emotional distance, the bridge between God and man, between one person and another. So even from prison in Rome, Paul feels very close to the Ephesians in Turkey. We call this communion, a joyful sharing of lives and hearts and faith, modelled on the Blessed Trinity, participated in by the Church in heaven and on earth, and most intimately experienced in this life in Holy Communion, which challenges us all in this time of separation. How do we maintain our closeness to God and each other during lockdown and help each other through? How can we make the most of this time of enforced retreat and make a spiritual communion when we can't make a sacramental one? What more might we be doing? This week, the News Corps papers issued a call to arms. The message was straightforward. This is a war against a deadly, invisible enemy. We will not win unless we get serious and on the same page and get the jab done. The invisible enemy is, of course, COVID. The soldiers, health professionals. The generals are health ministers and officials. The weapons, lockdowns, distancing and vaccines. And the spies are neighbours dobbing each other in. For 18 months now, world leaders have talked of war, emergency, darkest hour. Here in Australia, we have a national cabinet on a warlike footing, and a lieutenant colonel, lieutenant general in full uniform directing vaccine distribution. We've even been instructed to narrow our conception of the family to exclude grandparents, aunts and cousins, and to avoid touching loved ones, as if they were landmines. The portentous rhetoric has succeeded in getting people to take the pandemic seriously. Focused energy and resources on public safety, excused suspension of ordinary liberties and routines, and achieved a high level of compliance. But it also risks magnifying people's anxieties and alienation, causing panics such as World War II over toilet paper, encouraging passivity or dividing neighbours. In such a context, Paul's words today are prophetic. In Christ, we renounce the old rivalries and hostilities. Christ is God holding us close to himself and so drawing us close to each other. Christ is the bridge, the glue, the peace between us, Paul says, destroying in his own person the hostilities, restoring harmony through the cross, uniting humanity as a single body and reconciling them to God. Yet this gospel of peace is not the wisdom of our age. Interior peace, as this world understands it, is being tension-free. But that can be out of drugged stupor or distraction. insensitivity, or because we just don't care. Yet try as we might to anaesthetise ourselves, crises like COVID force their demands upon us. The question is, how are we to care without losing our inner serenity? External peace, by this world's lights, is not fighting. But that too might be the result of false charm, icy concord, or simply failing to engage. It can leave threats and violence simmering beneath the surface. Sometimes a call to arms is appropriate. But how can we respond to the very real challenges without compromising the very things our struggle is supposed to save? Beyond preserving life and economy, how do we protect relationships, community, education, the arts, our spiritual lives? True peace, the scriptures teach, is not pretending away challenges or evading responsibilities. There's no avoiding the fact that Paul was in prison, with all that entails. Many Christians after him would suffer the same fate. Such things must be faced head on. When Christ tells his disciples today to come aside to a lonely place, it's not to some haven free of tensions and trials. When he offers them a space for peace and quiet, it's not so they can block out all thoughts and worries. No, Jesus is calling them to restful prayer, to contemplative poise, to unflustered listening. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And Mother Mary demonstrated that some things must be pondered in our hearts. The question is, how do we make the most of this time of enforced retreat? How do we make it truly reflective, so that by the end of it, we will better know ourselves and God's plan for us, and better serve our loved ones, church and world? Ultimately, it's coming close we need as human beings, even when distancing is required. It's peace of heart and harmony between people we want, not the aggro and tension of war. Jesus' coming is marked by peace. He greets those he encounters with Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you, and dismisses them with, go in peace. Paul blesses people in the same terms, and the church has ever since. Peace, Paul says, is won by Jesus and a gift of the Spirit. At the coming Plenary Council of Australia, we will ask how we can draw closer to people after COVID and the lockdowns. How will church and society recover interior tranquility and external harmony? What meaning and hope can we give to people in such troubled times? The call of the gospel of peace is clear. The spiritual gifts are available. Mass and prayer, our opportunity to be greeted, blessed, and sent by Christ, who is our peace. How then will the Church in our times propose anew his gospel of peace? Sanctify the faithful with his spiritual gifts of unity and peace, and reach out to our society to inspire communion amongst us all.